So good morning. My name is Megan McGovern, and I am the Digital Asset Specialist at the Corning Museum of Glass. And I created this paper in response to several cold calls that I've received in the past year and a half or so of people, both within and without of the museum industry, who had been tasked with creating a digital strategy for their organization and had no idea where to start. So the creation of a digital strategy was my first job when I was hired, and it can seem like a daunting or even an impossible task, but it really need not be. We did something that maybe sounds illogical. We turned the task of creating a digital strategy, a digital asset management or DAMS strategy, into the creation of a document. And even though that might sound like more work, so not only do you have to create a strategy, now you have to write a paper, it ended up being hugely beneficial for us. Having a document allowed us to break that document into chunks and work on each of those chunks as a single smaller task as part of a larger whole. And also by having a document, when we were done, we had a record of everything that we had done, a demonstrable record of what we had accomplished that year. And we were able to use that document not only as something to disseminate to our staff in our museum, but also something that we were able to give to vendors when we started the request for proposal or RFP process, looking for a system that met our needs. So what I'm here today is to propose a framework, and there's handouts going around, for a model, a digital strategy plan, or digitization strategy plan. We couldn't decide at the organization, so we decided to call it the DigiPlan. So you'll hear me talk about that. Using both best practice, general type discussions for each of the sections that we ended up creating, and also talking more specifically about things that we learned, case studies, things of that nature. So how did we create this big document at the Corning Museum of Glass? And I should also probably mention that I'll refer to my museum as CMOG, Corning Museum of Glass. It's our common acronym, so if you hear me say that, that's what. We ended up having a cross-departmental team form the DigiPlan. And I think that was hugely beneficial because it gave us a really overarching view of different opinions and different needs and different wants. So our team was composed of IT, the library, curators, the directorate, which was hugely important in giving our resulting document weight and authority. Also our financial department, our photographers, and marketing. So lots of different opinions. You might think that too many cooks spoil the broth, but I think our methodology ended up fixing that. What we did is we started out with a general outline of what we wanted for our DigiPlan. And we did that by looking at other institutions' digital strategy documents, taking those common core elements that seem to be a unifying factor and using that as our outline. And then even though it sounds kind of odd, as the digital asset specialist, we would come up with these monthly meetings, and each meeting would tackle, or maybe two meetings would tackle a particular topic. So here's the introduction meeting, different things meeting. Instead of just coming into the meeting, we discovered very quickly sitting down with this large group of people and saying, okay, let's come up with a collection policy, collection development, let's go. And then just having crickets, we discovered pretty much after the first meeting that I would write a draft, basically a suggestion. Here's what I read, what other institutions are doing, here's something that we could do. And then the meetings really involved tearing that down. It's much easier to critique, constructively I hope, than it is to actually just compose from scratch. So that's how we did it. So we might have
some
slides. Dun, 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 dun.
If you just want to plug that in.
Okay.
And then I think if we hit. Let's actually make sure that we recognize displays. That's promising.
Yes, it is. Hey, hey.
Hey, all right. Oh, got that one.
Oh.
That's going to be on the wrong screen. Yay.
Cool.
There you go.
All right. So we'll skip forward a little bit. This was, don't panic, make it a document. the outline, the team. Okay. So we'll basically start phase by phase. So stage 1, we did introductory elements. Stage 2, we did direction and assessment. Stage 3, we did our policies and standards. And stage 4, we turned this DigiPlan document that we created into an RFP and an evaluation process for a software system that was going to fit our needs. So starting with the introductory elements, might feel a little strange to you. I know when I write papers, I actually like to do the introduction last. It ended up being hugely beneficial for us. Our introductory elements were comprised of a scope, a mission and vision, and our values and guiding principles. Scope is pretty self-explanatory. It's, what is this DigiPlan going to cover? Ours was explicitly image-centric. Videos were very complex. We were just starting out. The rapidly evolving standards of videos, going from SD to HD and now beyond. We just explicitly stated we're not covering videos, we're covering images. And I was glad that we did, because the board looked at the plan, asked about what about videos, and we were able to say, no, see in the scope, this first initial version of the DigiPlan, we're doing images only. Mission and vision, that section really provided a mission statement. So what are we tasked to do with our digitization program? And our vision, which was kind of our reach goal, what we aspire to be. That might also seem unnecessary, or you might be tempted to just use your museum's mission and vision. We ended up liking that we had a actual digitization program mission and vision statement, because what we ended up devising for ourselves ended up affecting a lot of the other sections of the DigiPlan. So if we had decided that our institutional mission was to accumulate as many digital assets as we could for the website, some of our technical standards and our collection policies would be different than if we were in the business of digitization for research needs for our staff, or if our real core thing was we have a lot of vulnerable materials in our library, reel-to-reel, and we wanted to salvage them. So why you're even bothering to focus on digital assets, having that really figured out at the beginning ended up being helpful for us. Our values and guiding principles was really a little bit more specific, more of ground rules. We found the American Library Association and the National Library of Australia hugely helpful, even though they're not museums. The American Library Association had a principle and a 2007 Principles for Digital Content that said digital content must be given the same consideration as other materials when conducting collection development, organization and cataloging of works, and preservation. So having that as the principle, we were able to use as a little bit of a funding lever. If we're going to treat our digital assets in the same way we treat our art, we're going to need the funding to support our activities. Similarly, the National Library of Australia has a collection digitization policy that says collection material is digitized once and only once in a use-neutral format that allows for a variety of current and future uses. And we adopted that principle and decided for our DAMS system and for the sake of our IT department, who's always worried about storage, we would have one version of an image stored, not a master version of an image and a smaller version for PowerPoint and a smaller version for other uses. We decided from the outset that we were really going to look for a DAMS system that could store that master, highest resolution version of the asset and create those smaller things as we needed them on the fly, rather than keeping multiple versions of many assets. Again, there's really no right or wrong to mission, vision, to scope, to guiding principles, but these were the decisions that we made. I would just probably add here that if you don't have directorate or leadership members on the team that devises your particular digital strategy document, having an authority statement might be a good idea. Just having that institutional buy-in, maybe from the board, maybe from your executive director. It would be a huge tragedy, I know, for our group if we spent a year creating this document only to have it not really carry any weight. So more than any other part of the DigiPlan, the introductory elements set the stage and kind of described, if you will, to use a metaphor, kind of our vehicle for digitization, how we wanted to run, how we wanted to operate. So second section, direction and assessment, really addressed our needs assessment, our inventory of holdings, and our inventory of staff skills. These ended up being some of the most important sections of our DigiPlan in terms of RFP and future projects. The needs assessment was very laborious to prepare, I'll be honest with you. We ended up having a survey across the institution. We had focus groups with different departments, and we had one-on-one interviews with very heavy image users. And from that, we were able to really create a report analyzing our results and the needs and common things that were wanted across the institution and some common trends in search behavior. So one of the things that surprised us was color fidelity. It was very important to our users. It wasn't something I necessarily would have thought of off the bat, but curators wanted to know that if we had, say, a system that could create derivatives on the fly, what they pulled out for a PowerPoint presentation was going to have the same color, the same accuracy, color fidelity as the master image. They didn't want to misrepresent our assets or have something that was too saturated or too green. So that was really important to know, and that ended up being one of our requirements in our RFP. Our inventories, I have to be honest, the inventory of holdings ended up being more important than the inventory of staff skills. Inventory of holdings is what it sounds like. How many assets do we have? How many assets did we have when we started, and how has that grown? What are the major groupings of assets? Do we have any weaknesses in our collection? Do we have 1 million pictures of stained glass and maybe only a couple pictures of glass sculpture? That really ended up giving us kind of a sense of where we were as we started our digitization program. The staff skills we thought might be more important. You know, who has SQL skills? Who's able to use Photoshop to be able to evaluate if a digitization vendor is producing images in the way we see fit. In retrospect, we probably didn't need it. HR and department heads are very much in tune with their staff skills, but it was an interesting exercise to start. So with the introductory elements being like a car, I would say the direction and assessment was more of the road. The inventories kind of told us where we were at that present beginning moment, and the needs assessment really gave us a very clear picture of where the institution wanted to go with digitization. From there, we went to our standards and policies, and these included our intellectual property policy, our collection development policy, our technical specifications, and our all-important metadata schema. Intellectual property policies will vary widely among institutions depending on copyright needs. We have a lot of modern artists, so we were pretty robust in our intellectual property policy. We pretty much outlined who was responsible for identifying copyright, what actions were going to be taken if a copyright holder couldn't be identified, what waivers, disclaimers, credit lines needed to be displayed with digital images if they were going to be passed on to another institution or used in an article, and then the all-important access privileges and security. Given our risk environment in terms of copyright and modern artists, do we want everyone to have equal access to high-resolution images? Do we want some images to be viewable but not downloadable? And coming out with those types of outlines, we were able to put together quite a few requirements in our RFP about what we wanted the system to be able to do and what we wanted it to be able to prevent. Collection development policy sometimes surprises people when I mention that was part of our DigiPlan. There is sometimes, especially in libraries, this belief that we should just keep everything digital. IT departments usually don't like that particular idea. So our collection development policy discusses how the addition of new assets will be prioritized if we're creating thousands per month. What criteria make something worth digitizing or worth capturing. If there's any requirements that we have to consider before accepting a particular digital asset, and when an asset might be deleted. It might be copyright, or it might be it's a picture of someone standing in front of a stained glass window and that person has crimped hair and bell bottoms. There are reasons you might delete an asset. This has ended up being very important. A lot of our staff pretty much know intuitively what's important to capture, but we have had artists approach our institution with donations of digital images from their laptops. And so having these in a document form is something we can give to potential donors and something we can use as discussion points as we're approached by different donors of digital assets. Technical specifications is probably one of the longest sections. So here's some of our selection criteria. Technical specifications is one of our longest sections in the DigiPlan. We really outlined based on type of material, born digital, 4x5-inch transparencies, film, the different types of capture specifications that we wanted. And you can see here that our principle for scan once, use many, we have our standards for master images. We also did something a little strange. We have something called master archival and master optimized. This was something that was rather unique to our museum. Master archival, if we're scanning a slide or a transparency, is an image exactly as it came off the scanner. So if we're scanning a yellowed slide with scratches, the master archival shows the yellowness and it shows the scratches. The optimized is something where it's touched up, color corrected, things of that nature. Our photography department likes to have the archival available. They like to do their own optimization when we have publications. But optimized is really easier to have on hand without having to bother photography when we're making our derivative images on the fly. So we have that particular distinction. We also, even though we're collecting master images and producing derivatives on the fly, we wrote down the types of derivatives that we wanted to create, for PowerPoint, for podcast, things like that. And we ended up with tables like this. And at the time, we wondered if it was a waste of time since we wanted to create things on the fly anyway. When it came time to evaluating vendors, though, having these documented allowed us to say, we're collecting masters, it's 600 pixels per inch TIFFs, and we want to be able to make a JPEG at 96 pixels per inch in these dimensions for a PowerPoint. Can you do that? And let's see you do that live. How fast is it? How long does it take? Things like that. So that ended up being very beneficial to us. Finally, metadata. Obviously, a good metadata schema covers the 4 key elements of metadata. Descriptive, what is this image of? Structural, is this image part of a collection of images? Is it related to other groups? Administrative, which is your copyright, and technical, which talks about your bit depth and those little technical specifications for different images. Because we don't have an infinite amount of time to discuss this today, I'll really focus on descriptive metadata because it was the most difficult and it ended up being the most surprising. I went into creating the DigiPlan thinking that we would adopt something like Dublin Core, one metadata schema that would just apply to all images. And instead, we have 3 descriptive metadata schemas, and it's actually worked out pretty well for us. We decided, after much discussion, and I think 3 meetings, that we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We had a descriptive schema for our objects that was used in our collection management system. We had a descriptive schema used in our library that was used in our library OPAC. And then we had our marketing images. So why reinvent the wheel if we're already describing library and objects? Why not just use what we have? So we ended up adopting that. So glass objects are described with the object schema that was already in place. Library objects described using the library schema that was already in place. And then the only thing that we really had to do was create from scratch an events and marketing schema for those images of people where using the object terms and the book terms wouldn't really apply. And for that, we basically created it using trial and error and user studies where we needed to create a minimalist schema because our marketing department is not a department of professional catalogers and they work according to tight deadlines. So less was really more for them. And quite a few of the fields that we created for them, like our keywords and our event program categories, were drop-down lists. We used controlled vocabulary because we noticed that people had different terms for different things. So is it kind of weird that we end up having 3 descriptive metadata schemas for an institution? Yeah, it probably is, but in practice, it's worked out pretty well because people who are used to looking for collection items, used to looking for glass objects, don't have to learn a new set of terminology. They can approach the collections management system and our DAMS system in the same way, use the same search behaviors, and get similar results. So finally, how did all of this turn into an RFP? And I do have a packet that I passed around that kind of shows a demonstration of how that works. But basically, all the work that we did, putting effort into making a document for our DigiPlan, ended up using a lot of material that we recycled for our RFP. So our introduction talked about our mission, why we were even bothering with digital assets, how many we had, what our users expected, and our functional requirements was made up of a lot of the things that we used in our technical specifications and our metadata schemas. And then on a broader level, the RFP evaluation process, once we got, here's what we want and here's the vendor's responses of what they can do, we were able to use those higher level principles and the needs assessment main themes to really evaluate different software clients and see, is this vendor right for us? So this is my proposed framework for a digital strategy document. It's really not as scary as it sounds. It looks like a lot of boxes, but if you only worry about the task at hand, this month I'm working on Introductory Elements, and I'm not going to think about the rest of it. It really ended up being very useful for us, and so I propose it for other museums, and certainly any questions or critiques or things that we missed, I would love feedback. So I found this preface to Digital Image Collections, Issues and Practice from 1996, which would seem old, but it really seems to summarize what we were trying to do. This idea of taking the time at the outset to establish guidelines and try to just really proceed in these rational, measured steps. Are there any questions? We ended up doing a synchronization of our collection.
So the question was, how does the DAM
thanks.
connect to the collection management system?
Thanks. We ended up later on hooking up synchronization between the two databases, the backend database of the DAMS and our collection management system. And in that case, we were really glad that we took the time with the metadata schema to say, you know, we're going to map these fields here because we had a very clear idea. We want this field, this field, this field, this field to go here, 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 and here. We could have done either, but our registrars were very adamant about having a one-way sync. So anything that changes in our collection management system gets moved over into our DAMS, not vice versa.
So with that, you're keeping images twice in both the collection management system and in the DAMS?
Yes, although our collections management system, MIMSI, only accepts 500 pixel by 500 pixel JPEGs, so the overhead for having that duplicate asset is fairly small. It's not keeping full res TIFFs.
On the metadata. So with the I'm trying to catch up a little bit on that. So do you have, you said you had multiple path schemas.
Mm-hmm.
Does each of the objects have each of those schemas contained within them, or are you dealing with three different schemas for various items?
We have three different schemas for various items. So an object would really only have the object schema. The way our DAMS is set up, it has those other fields available to them, but they're left blank. And the same thing, marketing images would have the specific marketing fields actually filled in, and then they would have a blank field that could be the accession number.
Marketing was trying to search for something that was done by a curatorial. When them filling in their fields, they wouldn't necessarily find something there. They would only find things that are in their searching methods, correct?
Right, and that's the one challenge we've had with our setup. We've had to train people to search for names without using quotes, so search for Dale and Chihuly rather than Dale Chihuly, the way the marketing department would think of him, or Chihuly, Dale, the way our registrars department describes him in our collections management system.
Thank you, Megan.
Great,
Andrew's going to come up next. Yeah. So Andrew's going to come up from the back of the room where he's been hiding. I think frantically finishing slides is one possibility.
Don't you love when that happens?
And there will be, if we keep our pace going, there'll be some time at the end if you think of more questions for any of our presenters.
I brought some goodies to share as well, which is really fun. Please bear with me while I have technical difficulties. Cool. All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Andrew Perti. I'm the founder of the Seattle Interactive Media Museum. After being a video game collector for about 9 years, 2 years ago, I decided that I wanted to start a museum about them because there really wasn't enough being done at the time for preservation or exhibition. So I started a nonprofit and donated my whole collection to it, which at the time consisted of about 4,000 items, 4,000 physical items, which really, if you really think about it, and the way our system is going to be devised and the way we think about a single video game, and by the way, for any conservators here, these are in our education collection, so we're allowed to fiddle with them and break them if we really need to. So this artifact right here, this is Shining Force CD. We really think of this as about 3,200 separate artifacts. And you say, holy crow, that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of metadata, and it really is. When in fact, only about 10% of that metadata is stuff that you have to put in every subsequent time you enter something in the database, because and we'll get there. So video games, awesome. This is just a little sampling of our collection. Yesterday for the Ignite session, this was said, the world belongs to those who see its potential. And there's actually a little bit missing to that. The world belongs to those who see its potential and do something about it. It's about implementation. It's about grabbing the bull by the horns and seeing that vision and changing what you're doing to get to where you want to be. Before I begin, really, I just have a simple question. How much does a polar bear weigh? And the answer is enough to break the ice. So now that we're all best friends, please feel free to approach me afterward or after lunch or whatever, and let's really have a conversation about your dam. And honestly, we had this conversation yesterday. Damn the dams because they're all broken. So be smashing, indeed. The caveat fractal, so let's really break it down. A caveat in grammar, in English, in writing is a little caret that pretty much symbolizes hey, you forgot some information, or wouldn't it be great if this was added? And in museum, library, archival sciences, a caveat can really sometimes mean, hey, just one more thing, but it turns into a time sink, and you have tons of stuff that, more metadata, and more keying stuff in, and it just turns into, you can spend a long time putting simple metadata in for one artifact, which is really kind of unfortunate. So how do we curtail that? And the answer is really research. What does your perfect system behave and look like? And that's really what we began. That was our premise from the beginning is what does it take to develop a museum library archive? And hey, it turns out it's a collections management policy, not system, it's policy, folks. And we'll get more into that in a moment. And how does it behave? And again, it all hinges on your policy. How thick is your collections management policy? This is really a rhetorical question. I've seen a lot of maybe 20 pages, 40 pages, maybe 100 pages. It should really be about 20 pages per artifact. Crazy. Per type of artifact, excuse me. Right, so per type of art, for example, we'll do Lion King for the Sega Genesis. This is a Sega Genesis game. It has certain characteristics which go across all Sega Genesis games, and you can codify that and apply that to every single Sega Genesis game that you get in your institution from here until the end of time, and put that in a logical framework and put it into a logical flow, and never have to worry about what do I need to do? Oh, it's right there in front of me. I've done this, now I can move on to this, now I can move on to this. Flowchart, awesome. It behaves intuitively based on collections management policy. So, domain analysis of MLA3SW, which is Museum, Library, Archive, Administration, amenities, which is like food and theater and stuff like that. S is storage and W is web, public web specifically. So yeah, there they are. Cool. Domain analysis. What do each of these parts of your organization absolutely need in order for the users, because it's all about users, people, in order to effectively do either their job or do their research, etc. And so, right, there's a registrar measuring some stuff. Cool. What does she need? She needs all sorts of different metadata elements. And so you have to codify them. Here are some people in an institution whom you have to codify things for. Registrars, collections managers, docents, directors. All of these individuals need their own separate metadata schema, which pulls information from the database specifically towards what their job is. I cannot tell you how many institutions I've been to that every single one of these people on the lists, save for directors, primarily, have the exact same metadata elements given to them in the exact same manner, or it's the exact same metadata elements given to them in a completely different manner because it's a different system, 4 times over. What a headache. But really, your real users of the information on your system should really be your patrons. They're going to use this system because there's a lot more of them in comparison to you, and they're going to have a lot more to say about it than you will because they're coming at it from many, many different angles. But this isn't a talk about patrons. This is a talk primarily about us. So, right, broad paintbrush. I was talking about this 2 seconds ago. All the people in your institution get the exact same metadata. And you know what? Honestly, for a video game specifically, let's do Pitfall. Pitfall is an action-adventure game, excuse me. Pitfall is an action-adventure game. A conservator does not need to know that this is an action-adventure game. They should not have that metadata pulled from the database and populated in any of their fields whatsoever. It's useless information to them. So, this is what this should really look like. everybody should really kind of get their own color, and the colors should all kind of mix together and maybe drip a little bit. And all of that is based on the codification of what their specific role in your institution is. Come umlaut. And here's where we get into the backronyms, which I love. Umlaut. The definition of umlaut is a change in sound for emphasis or disruption. And it's a German word, and that's what it means. So this is the name of our collections management system that we're developing from absolute zero, ground zero, from scratch. And it stands for Ubiquitous Museum Library Archive Unification Toolset. Okay? So you have essentially one gigantic database that holds all of the information for every single aspect of your entire institution, and the only pieces that are pulled from it are the pieces in which that individual needs. So, narrowcasting, again, based on collections management policy. Policy, not system. The system should utilize the policy, and your policy should be really, really, really exhaustive. Right, and the collections management policy is also based on the individual's job description as well. What does that person do? Oh, they have these characteristics as their role in the institution, then they should really have these codified set of metadata elements that they are given only. Metadata. So, there are really 5 main buckets, and they were talked about a little bit earlier, which is really cool. It's good to have reiteration. So, administrative, descriptive, preservation, conservation, technical, and use rights. And as it turns out, a lot of this information can be appropriated in specific ways that you really don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you get an artifact in, which is really kind of great. So Ferber, going on to Ferber, and this is the model that we use. If anybody's familiar with MARC records, Ferber's trying to take over MARC, but nobody's really jumping on board because nobody's implemented it yet at all. So awesome model, by the way. So we have the work, expression, manifestation, item. A lot of what we do is going to be at the manifestation and item levels. And so, right, we have the buckets. We have your 5 buckets there, and then we have Ferber. And a lot of the stuff falls under the manifestation, but there's a little bit of sharing back and forth between the item level stuff, and that's really the administrative. That's who gets to see it, accession records, all that fun stuff. And really all the other stuff falls under the manifestation, which is, imagine the manifestation of Pitfall is every copy of Pitfall that's the exact same on a bookshelf. And that is the kind of the essence of the game, of Pitfall. And you don't have to recreate that every time. That information is static, it doesn't change, and you can appropriate it as such. So, Ferber, which is way better than Ferber, and it stands for Functional Requirements for Video Game Records. Books are a very kind of static and not very broad. I can't think of the word. Anyway. Books have certain elements in them. Video games have a lot more. There's a lot more rich data, a lot more media, multimedia incorporated in a video game, of course. So Ferber really aims to tackle all of that and how to structure that and all that good stuff. And it's all about modules, modules, modules. Every single thing in umlaut is a module, period, end of story. From administrative to item level stuff, everything is a module. So for example, I can codify a module for a Wii game. I can say, I know a Wii game is going to have a case, I know it's going to have a manual, I know it's going to be on a disc, I know it's going to have a cover artwork, and I can codify that in the system. And every time I get a Wii game in, I can say, oh, it has these requirements. Does it have all of these requirements, yes or no? If it's a yes, then we put that information in. Once we put it in there, though, that module is already made at the manifestation level for Epic Mickey. So every time I get another copy of Epic Mickey in, I can say, oh, I can pull the static information based on this game into the new item level artifact that we got. So it really cuts down on redundancy. You don't have to put the same thing over in your system 10,000 times. It's absolutely wonderful. So modules, codified requirements and logistics based on collections management policy which can be appropriated in a specific order in an automated flowchart. Woo! So what does that all mean? Specific order. So we have collections manager looks at a collection, says, oh yeah, we'd like to acquire that, cool. So that goes in the system as, for documentation purposes. Then we have, the deed of gift, that goes in the system. And it's really, you follow the flowchart from accessioning to digitizing, and that's a whole nother module, and that's everything has its own module. So digitizing a Sega Genesis game is a lot different than digitizing a Super Nintendo game, is a lot different than digitizing a piece of hardware, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And again, it's just codifying each and every one of those, which requires research. And research is boring and tedious, but in order for change to happen, and change is really difficult, research is a must. And that research, so metadata and context, who sees what and how? How's my time, by the way?
8 minutes.
Okay. Good. Metadata and context. Who sees what and how? Modules. So, e pluribus unum is wrong. That's the way most systems work now, from many one, and everything goes into one central database. And that's fine. I mean, you have all these individuals putting all this information into one central location. That's great. But it all comes out of one central location as well, and it's queried from there, which is the incorrect way to go. So we actually need to flip that on its head. Lots of databases based on usage, privacy, and security modules. Again, modules, modules, modules. It's the codification of what every possible individual in your organization, internally and externally, might need for their metadata. So let's see, internal versus external, great. Research and codification and implementation. So again, research really involves exactly what it is that each person inside your institution does, codifying that, researching what your users need, what metadata elements they're going to need, codifying that, and then putting it in an effective flowchart to really make everybody's life easier across the board. And that's it. Yeah. Thank you. What's that?
We can take a couple of
Oh yes, please, questions. I love questions.
but repeat them into the mic.
Okay. Okay. Yes, please.
So, because you have multiples or similar things,
Yes.
that's why you're looking at Ferber and it's working for you.
Very much so. Yes.
But many of us are dealing with sort of unique things. So, do you think Ferber has any use in that?
So the question is, does Ferber have any use in collections which have many, many unique items in them? And I really do believe it does. It's not a one-to-one relationship, and that's why Ferber is so limiting, where Ferber is really a tiered hierarchy of nested Ferber. So, for example, you have a painting in an art gallery, and that painting has a frame, but you can also apply all these metadata elements to that frame, right? And you can apply all these metadata elements to that painting, and all of those elements should just be tags. And those tags can be appropriated to many, many different things. And so you can have this, joining of all these different of all these different items which share all of these characteristics. Almost seamlessly. And that doesn't really happen because a lot of metadata fields in a lot of collections management systems are all static text boxes, and they don't talk with anything else. Where if you have the codified set of elements that might belong in that category, then you can appropriate that tag as such, and then utilize it across the board. So, did that answer your question somewhat? Okay, could you be more specific at all? Can you expound upon that?
Maybe I'll talk to you.
Cool. More.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
So I think the modules is really intriguing on the back end. Does that
Yeah.
mean instead of having like perhaps a master SQL database, you're having a bunch of relational database tables that are talking to each other?
Yeah, so we're really looking into MongoDB, which is a completely flat database hierarchy. I mean, it's not really a database, it's just a flat hierarchy with no hierarchy. And it's really what you put on top of that And how you go and grab that information specifically is really what we're focusing at, and that's where the modules come in, is which information to grab in which context when it's appropriate. And we like to think of that as screen printing. You have a screen printer and you have paint, and then you have this overlay that you put there, and you run it over, and only what you want to go through goes through. And it's the modules codifying what comes through and what gets ingested into the different cached databases. Because your users, whether internally or externally, should never query your central database. That is a security nightmare. So it should all be cached, and only the information that is not sensitive should come through. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, good. Any more? Oh, please? I could sing a song.
We'll have another
Okay.
chance.
Cool. Thank you.
Let's let George come up. Thank you, Andrew.
Pardon me?
All right. Hopefully this won't be too difficult to set up. That's a hot mic. All right. Let's see. Oh. Perfect. Alrighty. Hello. My name is George DeMet. I am the founder and one of the owners of Palantir.net. We're a Chicago-based web design, development, and strategy firm that does a lot of work with museums and cultural institutions, colleges and universities, national nonprofits, and media organizations. So this segment is actually going to be a little bit different than the two that came before. I'm not going to really get into depth talking about digital asset management systems or the strategies used to organize the data in your collection. Really what I want to focus on are kind of the things you want to be thinking about as part of a technical implementation strategy, particularly when you want to take your collection and display it online. So this is really kind of more of a case study for the Martin Luther King Center. So the King Center, this is a photo of it right here. How many of you have actually been to the King Center in Atlanta? A couple of you. Okay, cool. So it was founded by Coretta Scott King after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. It's located in Dr. King's childhood home in his neighborhood in Atlanta. It's just a couple buildings down from his childhood home. It is the final resting place of Dr. King and Coretta Scott King. So that's their tomb right there that's located in the middle of this kind of beautiful reflecting pool. And they have open to the public there exhibits honoring Dr. King, Gandhi, Rosa Parks, other kind of folks who have fought for peace and civil rights. But what people don't know about the King Center is that it's actually the largest repository of primary source material on Dr. King and the civil rights movement. So to the very left of the photo, if you see that building there, the top floor of that building is the location of all of this material. And for many, many years, since the King Center was founded, it was really just kind of stored in this room in big unmarked boxes. These are kind of every single letter that Dr. King received, personal letters, notes, information, pretty much any documentation relating to SCLC, anything with the civil rights movement that Dr. King was related to or connected to. And And it was really stored in this way that it was just, from a conservator standpoint, kind of horrible. It was not a climate-controlled room. It was just kind of a room up on the top floor. And no one really had access to this unless you were, a scholar and you were able to get kind of special permission to go in and see it. Otherwise, it was not, the stuff in this collection was not available to the public. And as we'll see, there's some pretty impressive stuff there. So in 2011, the King Center embarked on a massive effort to preserve and digitize all of these documents. And the goal of the project was to enable people everywhere to learn firsthand from the wealth of knowledge stored in the King Center archives, as well as other collections. So it was coordinated by the folks at J.P. Morgan Chase. They have a Technology for Good program, and they worked with the King family to make this happen. So there's, like I said, there's over 1 million documents that were part of this project relating to both Dr. King and the civil rights movement. And, the goal is to basically just take all this, let's put some real organization, preservation around it, let's digitize it, and let's make a substantial part of this collection available online. So in order to do that, the folks at Technology for Good had to gather the talent and resources necessary for such a large undertaking on a very, very tight timeline. They started this project in the spring of last year, 2011. And so Palantir, we were brought into the project by New York City design firm C&G Partners, who is responsible for the website's information architecture, design, and user experience. We were responsible for the website development, implementation, and integration with the digital archive. The digitization effort was led by, I don't know how many folks are familiar with who Scott Geffert is, but he's a very well-known person who's overseen a lot of these kind of digitization efforts from imaging, et cetera. And then we're working, one of the other key partners was MicroStrategies. It's a company that specializes in enterprise content management solutions that often involve massive numbers of documents. So they were responsible for creating the on-site technical infrastructure. So this is a photo I took. So this is the room that they kind of set up on the upper floor of the King Center, where they had student volunteers from Morehouse and Spelman colleges who were responsible for scanning the documents and entering them into, they were using alfresco as their kind of DAMS solution. I'll talk a little bit more about that, because alfresco is not really properly a digital asset management system. It is an enterprise content management system with DAM capabilities. But this team of student volunteers was coordinated by a group of actual military veterans who are also skilled preservationists. This is some program, I believe, located out of Missouri that I was not aware of before. And then they took these documents, they scanned them, entered them into the alfresco database, and then they made that database available to a group of civil rights scholars, including folks from Stanford and other institutions, who then helped write the abstracts and apply the metadata to each of these items. So this is the kind of state-of-the-art, custom-built imaging machine that was created by Scott Geffert. This is designed for not only very high DPI imaging, but also for very rapid imaging, considering the number of items that needed to be digitized and the amount of time that was available. So I think this is a 400 DPI imaging, which they selected as being the most likely to be future-proofed for at least another decade or so. So the high-level project goals were to help the King Center better connect with a new generation, spread awareness of Dr. King's philosophy. One of the challenges is that, kind of every school child in America knows who Dr. King is, knows about the I Have a Dream speech, but the greater there's very rarely more in-depth knowledge taught about Dr. King in our school system, and kind of the nuances of his nonviolent philosophy are not as well known. And one of the mission goals of the King Center is to help spread awareness of those things, and their previous web presence was really not doing that for them. So that was one of the big goals of this project. Another goal, of course, is to take these documents and make them available to the public online, hopefully in an interesting and engaging way. And just a very sort of prosaic goal was to build a site that would be able to withstand massive amounts of traffic. We were doing our big, highly publicized national launch on Martin Luther King Day, and it was made very, very clear to us that the website could not go down. So, and we had no idea how much traffic we were going to get. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Process was really, really important for this project just because there were so many players and moving parts, and the project had such a tight timeline. We were brought in August of 2011 with the site launch date in January of 2012. And at that point, we didn't have designs yet. We didn't have material entered into the database. We were really all kind of scrambling to make sure this got done. So we had to have some really tight process around this. That included daily team scrums. Basically, the members of our project team got together every day. What have you done today? What did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? What's getting in your way? Meet every morning, figure out what those roadblocks are, and get through them. We had a unified project management system called Redmine, which is a ticketing system that we use. And one of the things that we did is we made sure that that system was not just used by us, it was also exposed to the other key partners and to the stakeholders at JP Morgan Chase and the King Center. We had regular check-ins set up with all the different partners, so with the folks from MicroStrategies and the folks from JP Morgan Chase and the folks from C&G Partners. And then on top of that, we actually had, and this is something that I don't think folks do very often on projects like this, we had weekly executive calls. And so this would just be where the principals from some of the different key partners involved would get together. There would be no agenda, but we just set up a half-hour phone call. And so if there were things that were kind of bubbling up or roadblocks that we were hearing about at a low level, that was something that we could talk about on those calls and make sure that those roadblocks got resolved. And that was actually toward the latter part of the project really, really helpful. It really helped us coordinate as a team, and it really, really helped the stakeholders have a lot more comfort in the progress of the project because they knew that they could talk to one of the other partner principals at any time, and always on that weekly call. So this is the kind of basic technology stack that was used. So the website was built in Drupal 7. As I said, Alfresco was the system used to store all the digitized document information. As I said before, Alfresco is really more of a ECM, Enterprise Content Management System, with digital asset management capabilities, as opposed to a dedicated asset management system or a collection management system like a TMS or a KEMU. However, given that the vast majority of what we're dealing with here is documents, letters, etc., it really made a lot of sense to use in this case. So some of the other technologies, we had the folks from AT&T and EMC provided us with access to an Atmos cloud instance that we were able to use. We used, because we had a pretty ambitious requirements for interactivity on the front end, and we didn't want to use Flash. We used jQuery, and then we also used SAS, which is front-end web technology, to create really flexible yet really standardized front-end templates for implementing the site design. So the basic technical architecture is that the archive information is then managed in Alfresco, and that Alfresco server is actually located in Atlanta, so that is local to the King Center. Within the assets from the archive, the images are then stored in the cloud on that EMC Atmos instance using AT&T Synaptic Storage as a Service. The website is actually hosted in a different cloud, Amazon Web Services, built on Acquia's managed cloud platform. It's basically a Drupal-optimized technology stack for hosting. And as I said before, a website built in Drupal 7, key modules used, of course, Vue, Zen, CSS3, Sass, Compass, and jQuery. Again, as you'll see from when we get to the look and feel of the site and some of the things you can do on the site, we had to have a pretty high degree of interactivity, user interactivity with the interface, and we wanted to make sure that that was something that was going to be as accessible as possible and as standards compliant as possible. So this next slide here, I'm not a horribly technical person. My engineers, but I asked them to diagram out what we did, and my engineers created this for me, and then they tried to explain it to me using very, very small words. Several times. So essentially what's going on here is that you have Alfresco in the upper left. That's using Alfresco's Web Services Interface Standard, which I call CMIS. Other people call it CMIS. And that's used to connect to the other systems. Drupal has a CMIS module, but it lacked the maturity or the functionality that was required for this project. So our solution, instead of using Drupal to talk directly to the Alfresco instance using CMIS, we actually used Drupal's migrate module plus Drupal queues plus some custom Alfresco code. So essentially, we're using migrate module to pull data out of Alfresco, create nodes in Drupal or pages in Drupal. We put that into a queue that creates a primary image derivative, which goes up to the Atmos cloud, as well as a secondary image derivative that also gets pushed up to the Atmos cloud. So you can think of this as kind of like the big version of the image that you can zoom in on and the thumbnail version of the image. And the Drupal queue, also assuming it's something that's supposed to be accessible by the public, publishes that node. So then when the end user in the bottom right comes to the website, they're getting the page content pulled out of Drupal and the image content pulled out of Atmos. And what that means, and this is something Andrew was talking about, the end user, when they come to the website, they're never accessing data from Alfresco directly, from the locally hosted server. That's not something you want to do. This is all basically functioning in the cloud. So if there is something happens at the data center in Atlanta and the Alfresco instance goes down, or they need to take it down for maintenance, or they need to change something, it actually does not have any impact on the availability of the site whatsoever. So let's take a look at what the site looks like. This is the C&G Partners design that we implemented for the home page. This is the main archive page. You can see every time you visit this page, different documents bubble up to the surface in randomized order using a pretty cool randomized tile system. You can go through and look at different kind of topic areas within the archive. If you drill down into a specific document, and what we have here, this is the handwritten draft of the Nobel Prize speech that Dr. King wrote. You can take a look at this. You can use the tool to zoom in. You can look at all the different pages. You've got information on the left that has kind of all the related documents, the abstract, some of the metadata. There's on some of them, there's translations. And there's also, which is really, really cool and was a really key part of the project, actually, there's some social media sharing tools that can be used as well. This collection is amazing. Not only does it have letters and speeches and all those things, it also has one of my favorite things in this collection are little index cards that Dr. King used to just jot down ideas and thoughts. And these are things that have never been seen by anyone, and they're absolutely amazing, and it really gives you a sense of kind of the depth of the knowledge and the thinking and the expertise that Dr. King had, and the things that he was thinking about that was going far beyond just the civil rights movement, but really about how people can interact with each other in a much better and more productive way. So, launch, that was on Martin Luther King Day this year. We knew we needed to be prepared, so we did pre-launch performance testing. We had over 25,000 simultaneous simulated users, which we passed after 3 or 4 times with flying colors. If you're going to do this pre-launch testing, I definitely recommend that you schedule multiple setups for this, because you're not going to pass it the first time. There's always going to be something you need to tweak and change. In this case, we actually found that our weak point was the load balancers, so we had to beef up the load balancers in order to be able to hit our numbers. The media coverage on day 1, BBC News, USA Today, ABC News, Diane Sawyer mentioned it on the air, CNN, other international media outlets, plus we had the entire PR muscle of JP Morgan Chase behind this, and so they were promoting it on their website. They had a booth and event set up at Madison Square Garden, as well as they were putting it on every single one of their ATMs nationwide, and I've got a picture of that. So launch day, we were prepared for literally millions of users. We ended up getting 175,000 unique visitors served on launch day, so we didn't have any issues. There was no downtime at all. We were prepared to handle much more traffic, and the great thing, because we are hosted in the cloud and because the traffic to the site really is going to be clustered around Martin Luther King Day, after that had passed, we were able to scale down the hardware, and then when January comes around again, we're going to scale it back up to be able to handle the traffic. This is the ATM machine at my local bank. It was kind of cool. I've never had a website that was promoted on my ATM machine before. So very briefly, just finishing up, I'm going to show a couple of coming soon features. This is the thing. We've actually completed development of this, and we're just waiting to get kind of final approval within the King Center for launch. But this is the Share Your Dream feature that's going to enable visitors to basically submit and share their dreams through the website online. We're then going to take those dreams, we're going to pull them together and allow people to look at them by keyword, location, so you can see what different people in different parts of the country or different parts of the world are thinking about. What are their dreams, what are their aspirations. And this is really a big deal for the King Center. It ties into the larger goals of the archive project to really help encourage engagement with Dr. King's legacy and philosophy, not, just for those people who, might remember the civil rights movement, but to really try to energize a whole new generation of folks. And, I said we saw this on launch day with the social media sharing tools. We were able to kind of track what documents people were sharing online using those tools via Twitter, Facebook, and everything. And it was amazing just to see what kind of a great educational resource this was. In our initial audience identification, we actually had teachers talking about how what they really wanted and needed was a really great, fun, accessible, easy to use primary source resource for information about Dr. King, and they were very, very pleased with the results. So the Share Your Dream actually takes its inspiration from this physical booth that was used at Madison Square Garden and other places, where people are encouraged to come in and write down their dream on a piece of paper. And what they do is they've actually created like a little kind of a cheap version of the imaging equipment. They take a picture of it, they scan it, and then they put it up on that wall. And that information is actually going to form the initial pool of data that goes into, and this is kind of a mock-up screenshot of that Share Your Dream, what it's going to look like. And so you can see we have the scan, we also have the OCR'd version, so you can see what the actual text is, what the person is talking about, where other people are sharing those same ideas, and you map it out not just on a local level, but also on a national level and international level as well. So that's what I have. You can find out more by going to thekingcenter.org. You can also look on our website. We have a little case study write-up as well. You can also follow us at Palantir. You can follow me at DeMet or email me, and I also have some literature on the table if you're interested. Thanks. I can take them at the table. That's cool.
So we have some time left in the session. Thank you for all the presenters. Andrew, would you come back and join us so that we can get you at a microphone? I think Andrew and I have the same disease in that we're dangerous around microphones, but that's okay. We'll try to control ourselves. You know, I have a kind of a reflection, and then we can get to some questions. But I started the session off stalling for time, but also sort of talking a little bit about how a digital asset management session at MCN, isn't it kind of deja vu all over again to some degree? But you know what, I was sitting there thinking, it's really not. Because 10 years ago, our dream, we had a dream. Our dream was that we could buy software and solve our problems, right? And not all dreams come true. So, because you know, it's sort of the old adage now, right? Well, we realized we had lots and lots of digital assets piling up. We had digital photographers and digital film, and we had CDs and DVDs, and we had a big problem, right? So we'll buy a digital asset management system. Then we had two big problems. So now what I hear, though, in all of these projects, there's a common thread. They're starting with purpose and process instead of fantasy and hope. They may have had that as well. But thinking about why before you go to how and what is extraordinarily important. And I think you heard that from all of them. And the why might depend a lot on sort of policy and strategy, might have depended a lot on what you're going to deliver at the end, what the end result of all this effort will be. But I'm impressed by the fact that our conversation has shifted from this sort of false belief that software will save us to understanding our responsibility and the need to really think first. I have 3 kids. I'm always talking about thinking first. Sometimes it sinks in. I don't know. So we have some time for questions. Any of our panelists ready to answer? I think there's an extra microphone there, Megan, if that's easier than leaning over.
Yeah, here I can also make sure that's turned on. Yeah.
Fire away.
I'm Andrew. Oh, sorry. That's George.
Do you have a question for me?
Yes.
All right. Hi there.
If the website was in EC2, why did you use Atlas as your
So the website was on AWS. The assets for the collection were in the Atmos cloud, and the reason, quite honestly, that we use that is that the folks from AT&T had made it available very generously, and so we knew we had that available for the assets, and that was going to be a great tool to use for the assets. We didn't want to put the website there because we wanted to have. The King Center has a very limited in-house technical staff, and we knew that they were going to need a completely managed stack to host the website. And and the folks who provide that are Acquia, and Acquia uses AWS. So that's why there's a little bit of a disconnect there. I think if somebody had made available a ton of space on AWS or EC2 for the assets, we very well could have put them there as well. But in this case, it worked out pretty well.
except for the higher cost for data transfers in and out?
Actually, we don't. Actually, that's not too much of an issue because again, the Atmos stuff is donated. That's provided, so they don't have costs there. And the website hosting costs are fixed, so because they're working with a platform on top of AWS, and so they really, the website itself, doesn't use as many resources as it would obviously if you were pulling all the assets from EC2 constantly.
Found I have a microphone so you can ask questions into a mic and we can get you recorded. Josh.
How do you deal with things like, for example, I guess this is a bit more applicable in the grander scheme, really. Things like Steam, games from Steam like Team Fortress 2 and downloadable content, stuff that's always evolving. Does your system account for evolving content?
Right. So that is the major hurdle right now across all aspects of video game preservation endeavors whatsoever. in order to really effectively preserve something, you really need to partner with the company who is in charge of the back end and really be able to get that code and get snapshots as they roll new things out and say, oh, this is one version, this is the next version, this is the next version. And stuff like World of Warcraft, I mean, they're constantly updating things all the time because it's in queue. And I mean, there's really no effective way to preserve these things right now, unfortunately. The best thing that we can do from a consumer standpoint or from a preservation institutional standpoint without having that access to the back end is basically just getting all the information that you can, recording all the information that you can that's given to the client. And unfortunately, a lot of that is encrypted, so it's pretty much useless data, which is unfortunate. But things like video recording, audio recording, that kind of stuff. And you really need a concerted effort across all of the users as well, because there's a lot of peer-to-peer traffic that happens, such as text conversations or even voice conversations, that you really miss out. And the context of the entire experience is lost if you don't have all of that fun stuff. So it's really... Speaking of which, there was a great white paper called Preserving Virtual Worlds, which was a grant done by the Library of Congress. It was published in 2010, August 2010, I want to say. And it was a white paper done by about 10 institutions across the country. It's about 150 pages long. It's not too bad. But they really get into some of the dangers and pitfalls of not having that information available from the consumer standpoint.
If I can just add, at my institution, we've talked about digital asset management, and now we're just starting to talk about digital preservation. And it's exciting if you want to take the optimistic view and that there's all this new stuff to learn, and it's a little frustrating on the other hand, where if we finally have this document where we have our digital asset management fairly well thought out, and then there's this moving target of preservation. So how do you preserve something that's changing constantly?
Right.
Amy?
Well, just one more quick addition to that. So, for example, StarCraft, and this is a great example. StarCraft has had multiple versions, and they're very distinct, and they're released they're not really on top of each other. So you really can get the specific time frame. And you can record your gameplay starting in version 1.7, I think. You can make a recording of your gameplay, and that recording will only work in that specific version. So you have versions 1.07 through 1.16F, and each of those versions is required in order to play back the entirety of all the recorded playback videos. And really the way to tackle that is virtualization. There's a great piece of software called ThinApp, which got transferred and bought by VMware. And do you know what they renamed it? I don't. Anyway, ThinApp, as it was once called, basically you could hit record, and it would record every single thing that went on the computer until you hit stop. So you can do all the files that got transferred on the computer. You can see what registry keys were entered, and then it takes a composite snapshot of that and makes it into a single executable. And then you can take that and do that for every single version, and that's a daunting task, and that is a time crunch, and it's huge. But in order to really effectively preserve something, it's necessary. And then you can retroactively retrofit all of that information that was installed, just by opening that single executable, and it overlays it on the system. And then when you close it, it takes it all away. So it's really that's really the only way of going about doing things that I can see right now.
Megan, I wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit about rollout and training and driving adoption and what's worked and what hasn't worked.
Sure. Rollout was, December 2009, January 2010. So we've had our system up for 2 years. We really benefited from running, as George said, several pilots prior to launch. Our first fake rollout day, we had all sorts of little glitches that we caught. The other thing that I think has really served us well, in our Digiplan, the original edition, we threw in a little 2-pager extra about communications and marketing strategy. And we really decided as an institution that the best way to roll out a new program, given the failure of so many IT projects, were to treat staff as customers. Like, we are a marketing firm and we are pitching this product to customers. So doing that and taking the mentality, like the customer is always right, being available 24 hours a day, it was hard work, but it really helped get a lot of users, at least this very positive feeling towards the IT staff and myself. You're welcome.
Any other questions? Going once. Going. Great. Well, can we thank our panelists one more time?
Thank you.
And I think I can speak for them when I say they're all available for questions as the conference wears on. If you've never been to MCN before, it's all about conversation. Approach people, ask them questions, thank them for their time. And don't forget about the special interest group. You'll hear them referred to as SIGs. Here at MCN, there's one for digital assets, and it's a great place to be connected with people or having this conversation all year long. Thank you.
Cool.